What are you even doing here? Those 7 words sliced through Margaret Thompson like a knife through silk. They weren't whispered. They weren't hidden behind a fake smile. They were sharp, loud, deliberate. And worst of all, they came from the bride Jessica, the woman Margaret had poured $43,000 into pleasing. The music stopped. Heads turned. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Margaret stood there in her pale blue dress, clutching the small gift bag she had brought, just a simple necklace box. A final blessing, she thought. But now that box felt like dead weight in her hand. The bride's eyes didn't flinch. Her lips curled into something cold. Something rehearsed. You were uninvited yesterday. Remember, a wave of humiliation crashed over Margaret. Her cheeks burned. Her heart pounded. She looked around the grand reception hall. Chandeliers shimmered above her. Guests in expensive gowns and tuxedos watched like it was theater. But this wasn't a performance. This was her real life, and it was unraveling. Margaret took a breath so deep it hurt. "I'm leaving," she said gently. Then she smiled, a small, knowing smile. "But before I go, I'd love for you to meet a very special guest." And with that, she stepped aside. The hall gasped. Margaret never planned to be the kind of mother-in-law who kept receipts. But when your entire savings, your husband's life insurance, and your home equity are all poured into one wedding, well, you remember every dollar. She remembered the $12,000 Vera Wang gown, the 2,000 imported Ecuadorian white roses, the Bellamy Estates golden chandeliers, and the $3, $500 photographer who only shoots in natural light. Each of those details, each payment had been made with love. A love so blind it never once asked, "Does she really deserve this?" Margaret had wanted this wedding to be a gift, a way to honor Andrew, to welcome Jessica, to create memories wrapped in joy, not deceit. But now that dream was unraveling thread by golden thread, and all she could think of was that smile, Jessica's smile, the one she wore as she tried on the dress Margaret paid for, the one she used while sipping champagne Margaret bought, the smile that had cost $43,000 and yet never once felt truly honest. Margaret didn't just lose money. She lost something far more sacred, trust. Margaret didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her silence had more power than a scream. She turned to the guests, her hands steady despite the storm in her chest. "I'm leaving," she said softly, "but before I go, I'd like to introduce someone very special." The bride Jessica froze. A flicker of panic flashed behind her lashes. She wasn't expecting this. From the far end of the ballroom, the doors opened. Footsteps echoed on polished marble floors. And there he was, Marcus Rivera. Not in a tuxedo, not with a smile, but with eyes that had seen too much and a folder tucked under one arm like a weapon. Jessica's breath caught, color drained from her face. Margaret watched her with quiet satisfaction. This wasn't revenge. It was truth, walking and wearing work boots and carrying receipts. The crowd murmured, confused. Andrew squinted toward the stranger approaching the stage. Jessica whispered, You invited him." Her voice trembled now. Margaret didn't answer. She didn't need to. Marcus was about to do all the talking. Jessica Miller entered Andrew's life like she was written by a screenwriter. A pediatric nurse, soft-spoken, volunteered at animal shelters, said grace before meals. Even helped old ladies cross the street, probably. She was beautiful, but not in a loud way. She had the kind of beauty that made people trust her. Golden hair, soft eyes, a smile that felt like a promise. She met Andrew at the hospital. He'd sprained his wrist. By the time she handed him the discharge paperwork, he was already in love. And honestly, so was everyone else. Andrew introduced her like she was a miracle. "She's kind, Mom. Really kind. She makes me feel like I matter." Margaret smiled. She listened. But inside something itched. A quiet thought. No one is that perfect. Jessica told stories about growing up with nothing parents who disapproved of her dreams, sacrifices she made for love. Margaret wanted to believe her. She really did. But something didn't sit right. Jessica never asked about Andrew's dad. She never offered to help with wedding planning, just smiled and agreed with whatever Margaret said. And she always used cash. Margaret had raised a child, buried a husband. She knew when something wasn't real. Jessica was like a painting, beautiful from far away, but up close, too smooth, too flawless, too perfect to be real. Margaret noticed it first at brunch. Jessica pulled out a wad of crisp bills. No card, no Venmo, no hesitation. Some people just don't trust banks, she'd said with a giggle, folding the receipt neatly. At first it felt quirky, old-fashioned, almost charming. But then it happened again. At the dress fitting, the venue deposit, even the coffee run. Always cash, always clean, always careful. And then came the stories. So many stories. Jessica once said she grew up in Idaho, but another time she mentioned summers in Maine. One week she said her dad was a fisherman. Next month he was a traveling preacher. Or was it a construction worker? The stories changed like outfits. Always polished, always emotional, but never the same twice. Margaret tried to bring it up with Andrew. He brushed it off with a shrug and a smile. She's just private mom, sensitive. You're overthinking again. But Margaret wasn't overthinking. She was connecting dots. The woman who forgot where she grew up. The woman who always had exact change. The woman who avoided credit cards like they were poisoned. Jessica wasn't old-fashioned. She was hiding something. And the longer Margaret watched, the more convinced she became that this angel didn't have wings. She had escape plans. It was supposed to be a simple drop-off. A box of wedding favors. 10 minutes in, 10 minutes out. Margaret still had her coat on when she stepped into Andrew's apartment. The living room was quiet. Too quiet. Then she heard it, a voice. Jessica's voice. Low, urgent, coming from the bedroom. She froze. Something about the tone didn't feel right. Marcus, I told you not to call me on this number. Yes, the wedding's still on. I'll have access to his accounts once we're married. You want a bigger cut? We agreed on 30%. Margaret's knees almost gave out. She pressed herself against the hallway wall, heart pounding in her chest like a war drum. The old lady already gave us over 40 grand. She'll probably give us more for a down payment after the honeymoon. This mark's worth at least 200K mark. That word's so casual, so cruel. She wasn't Andrew's mother in that moment. She was a target. Her son wasn't a fiancé. He was a score. Her hands trembled as she clutched the box tighter, afraid it might drop and expose her. She backed away, slowly, silently. When she finally reached the front door, she didn't say goodbye. Didn't leave a note. Didn't even breathe until she was 3 blocks away. Then she pulled the car over and broke. Margaret sat in the driver's seat, hands trembling around the steering wheel. She couldn't feel her fingers. She couldn't feel her lungs. The air was thick, like grief, like betrayal. Her son, her only child, was about to marry a woman who saw him as a price tag. And her, the mother who had sacrificed everything, she was just part of the con. She let her forehead rest against the steering wheel. She didn't cry at first. There was no room for tears, only the numb, quiet hum of devastation. The minutes dragged by. 10, 20, 30. The world outside kept moving. Cars passed, birds chirped, people laughed on the sidewalk. But inside that car, Margaret was unraveling. Then somewhere between minute 45 and 50 something shifted. Not loudly, not suddenly, but deeply. It was small at first, a flicker of heat in her chest, a tightness in her jaw, a soundless whisper rising from the wreckage. No, not my son, not this time. She straightened her back, wiped her face with the sleeve of her coat, looked into the rearview mirror and saw not a broken woman but a mother about to go to war. Margaret didn't sleep that night. She didn't cry either. She researched. At 2:00 a.m. with nothing but the kitchen light and her determination, she typed into Google private investigator Charleston SC. That single search would change everything. By 10:00 a.m., she was sitting across from Patricia Hayes, a former detective turned private investigator. No nonsense, sharp-eyed. And after hearing Margaret's story, dead serious. Mrs. Thompson, Patricia said, "This sounds like a romance scam with a wedding twist. These people are professionals. They target love, they study loneliness. Then they strike." Margaret slid a check across the table. How long will it take? Patricia didn't even blink. If she's stupid enough to use her real voice on the phone? Not long. 6 days later, Margaret's phone rang. It was Patricia, her voice tight, low, controlled, but underneath urgent. "You'll want to sit down for this." Margaret sat at the kitchen table, gripping her teacup like it might fly away. "Jessica Miller doesn't exist. The woman your son is marrying is named Sarah Collins." She felt the air leave the room, like someone had opened a vacuum in her chest. Patricia continued. "She's 29, originally from Tampa. 3 arrests, 1 conviction for fraud. She specializes in long games, fake jobs, fake names, fake heartbreaks. She has a known partner, Marcus Rivera, until she conned him too. Margaret didn't speak, couldn't. She's been using the Jessica Miller identity for 8 months, Patricia added. Fake social security, fake employment history, even the nursing job's a cover. She only volunteers part-time to appear legit. Margaret closed her eyes. The lies, the stories, the cash, the tears, all of it scripted. Her son wasn't in love with a woman. He was in love with a con. It took one phone call, just one. Mr. Rivera, my name is Margaret Thompson. I believe you knew her as Sarah Collins, but I know her as Jessica Miller, my son's fiancée. There was silence. Not static, not hesitation. Just raw, stunned silence. Then, where is she? Margaret's voice stayed calm. She's in Charleston, marrying my son in 9 days. She's already taken over $40,000 from us, and she's not finished. Another pause. Then Marcus spoke, and his voice was no longer cautious. It was steel. Lady, I don't know what kind of game you're playing. She said the mark was worth at least $200 million. She plans to empty my son's bank accounts after the wedding and disappear, like she did with you. This time the silence cracked, a sharp intake of breath. You heard her say that word for word. Marcus exhaled, slowly, like someone who'd waited years to hear justice finally knock. She took 15 grand from me, vanished in the middle of the night, left me holding the hotel bill and a rental car she never returned. I've been chasing her for 2 years. Margaret didn't flinch. Then maybe it's time we end the chase, together. Marcus hesitated just for a moment. What are you proposing? Margaret leaned in, voice firm. She's having a church wedding, 300 guests, expensive venue, cameras, public. She's about to have her perfect moment. She paused, then delivered the line that would set everything in motion. What if her past walked down the aisle before she did silence? Then, you want me to crash the wedding, I want you to destroy her mask, right there, in front of everyone, including my son. Marcus was quiet, then he laughed low and bitter. Damn, you're colder than she is. No, just older and smarter. They planned for 30 minutes. 2 strangers, 1 mission, justice. Margaret didn't throw a tantrum. She didn't scream. She didn't storm the chapel. No, she did something far more dangerous. She picked up her phone and started cutting the strings. The first call was to the venue, Mrs. Sullivan. This is Margaret Thompson, the groom's mother. There's been a change in payment. The bride's family will be handling the final balance. A pause. Oh, really? That's wonderful news. Yes, it is, Margaret said sweetly. Family unity, you know how it is. But please hold all charges to my account until you speak to the Millers directly. Then she gave them a fake number. One Patricia had traced Jessica's burner phone used for vendors. The next calls were methodical florist, caterer, photographer, DJ. Each one heard the same line, the Millers have decided to handle the rest. And each one received a dead-end contact number. Margaret's voice never wavered. She was polite, cheerful even, a perfect mother of the groom. But with every call, she tightened the noose around Jessica's fantasy, and Jessica, still planning her dream day, with no idea the bottom was already falling out. By the time Margaret hung up her final call, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt precise. If this wedding is built on lies, she whispered to herself, then let those lies collapse under their own weight. Margaret didn't want chaos. She wanted clarity. She didn't want revenge. She wanted revelation, and that required precision. She met Marcus at a quiet diner off the interstate. No suit, no drama, just black coffee and a notebook. They didn't talk like strangers anymore. They spoke like co-conspirators. She walks down the aisle at 2 sharp, Margaret said. You'll arrive at 1:30. Park outside. Wait for my signal. What's the signal? A text. 1 word now. Marcus nodded. And you will be inside. Not on the guest list, but I have my ways. She showed him a detailed floor plan of the chapel. She pointed to the side entrance, the garden path, and the column shed stand behind. You'll enter once she's halfway down the aisle. The timing has to be perfect. Not too early, not too late. It has to hit like a thunderclap. Marcus leaned in, voice low. What if your son defends her? Margaret didn't flinch. He will, at first. That's why you bring the folder. The photos, the recordings. Don't just accuse, expose. They rehearsed it like a mission. Down to the minute, down to the gesture, down to the look on Marcus' face when he would say her real name, Sarah Collins. And when they parted that night, There was no handshake, no farewell. Just two people walking away with one shared goal. Collapse the lie in public on her perfect day. Margaret packed a suitcase, not with clothes but with credibility. A few dresses, an old travel guide, a pair of shoes she didn't plan to wear. She left it by the door where Andrew would see it if he stopped by. Proof that she meant it. She was going away for the weekend, or so they thought. She even called Andrew 2 days before the wedding. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice motherly warm. "I've been thinking maybe I was too involved. It's your day. If Jessica's more comfortable without me there, then that's what matters." There was silence on the line. "Then, Mom, that really means a lot. Jessica's been so stressed." Margaret smiled through the ache in her chest. "Of course I love you. That's all I ever wanted, for you to be happy." Andrew sounded relieved, grateful, clueless. The next evening, Jessica called. Margaret stared at the screen for a full 10 seconds before answering. She could have let it go to voicemail. But no, this was part of the plan. The final test. "Mrs. Thompson," Jessica said sweetly, "I just wanted to say thank you for understanding. I know it must have been hard, but you're really doing the right thing." Margaret's voice didn't tremble. It didn't crack. It glided. "Of course, dear, a bride should feel completely comfortable on her wedding day. Andrew told me you're going to Savannah, that's the plan. A little antiquing, maybe a walk by the river. You two just focus on the big day." "That sounds lovely," Jessica cooed. "When we get back from the honeymoon, maybe we could do lunch at Love for us to be close." Margaret laughed softly. "Of course, darling. I'm sure we'll have so much to talk about." The music swelled. White petals lined the aisle like a trail to paradise. 300 guests stood, all eyes glued to the doorway. Phones lifted. Cameras clicked. And there she was, Jessica, a vision in silk. The $12,000 dress hugged her frame like a custom promise. The pearl necklace, Margaret's, glowed under the church lights, resting just above her proud painted smile. She walked slowly, elegantly, as if the universe had been designed for this very moment. But the universe had other plans. From the pews, whispers rose. "She's stunning. Those pearls, aren't they Margaret's? I heard she's not even here." Andrew stood at the altar, hands folded nervously. He smiled, but his eyes kept darting to the back, searching. Not for Jessica, but for his mother. She wasn't there, or so he thought. As Jessica stepped past the final row of guests, a sudden hush fell over the chapel. Then wait, a man stood. Back row, black suit, steady voice. "Before this wedding continues, there's something everyone needs to know." Gasps, heads turned. Jessica froze mid-step. He wasn't in the invitation list. He didn't need to be. The moment Marcus stepped forward, the air shifted. Sarah Collins. His voice echoed like thunder across the cathedral. 3 words enough to stop every breath in the room. Jessica's smile shattered. Her bouquet slipped. "You thought you could run forever?" He continued, eyes locked on hers. The name Jessica died right there, replaced by truth. Gasps broke out. Phones lowered. Mouths opened. "Who is he? Did he just say, 'Sarah, what's going on?'" Andrew took a step forward, confused. "Marcus," he whispered, barely audible. But Marcus didn't answer him. His gaze never left the bride. "You changed your name, your story, your past, but not your greed. 5 years ago, you took my love, my trust, my $15,000 and vanished. You promised me forever. Instead, you practiced for this day." Jessica trembled. Makeup couldn't hide the cracks forming on her perfect mask, and still she tried to speak. I don't know who saved it," Sarah Marcus snapped. He pulled a small device from his pocket. "Would anyone like to hear what she really thinks of her dear mother-in-law?" The recording played. Loud, unforgiving. "That lonely old hag, please. Once I marry Andrew, I'm shipping her off to some nursing home." 300 guests, one silence, and then the sound of Margaret's pearls softly clinking as Jessica dropped them. The truth didn't just come out. It was projected. It was played. It was exposed like a movie premiere of betrayal starring Sarah Collins. Marcus wasn't done. He pulled out a tablet, connected it to the projector meant for wedding photos. But instead of childhood memories or couple selfies, the screen flickered, and there she was, Sarah Collins, blonde, smirking, caught on surveillance footage from a pawn shop in Dallas, pawning jewelry that once belonged to another ex-fiance. Then came the mugshot. Charged with felony fraud 2019, arrested under the name Kelly Monroe. Gasps filled the church again. Another document, a bank statement. Jessica's alias Sarah receiving multiple payments, different men, same pattern. The dots connected themselves. Even Andrew couldn't unsee it now. But the final blow, it wasn't a photo, it wasn't a bank record, it was a voice, her voice. He's so gullible. Once I get the ring and access his finances, I'm gone. And his sad little mother, please. That lonely old bat should thank me for pretending to like her. The audio played loud and clear. Marcus didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Andrew's hand rose slowly, shaking, pointing at Jessica. Is that your voice? Jessica's lips parted. No words, no excuses. Just tears, but no one was moved. This wasn't a heartbreak. This was a funeral for trust. And Margaret. She stood tall, not broken, not bitter. She was the storm that warned them all. Andrew stood frozen, his chest rising, falling like a man trying to breathe in the middle of an avalanche. His bride Jessica, no Sarah, stood inches away, wrapped in lies and dressed in white. Take it off, he whispered. Jessica blinked, confused. The pearls, he said louder. Take them off. They were my mother's. She hesitated. Now. His voice shook not from fear, but from rage, barely caged behind years of trust. Jessica fumbled with the clasped fingers, trembling as she removed the necklace. Margaret's wedding pearls, the last heirloom of a family line, nearly shattered. Andrew took it. He didn't throw it. He didn't break it. He walked down the aisle toward Margaret and gently placed the pearls back into her hands. I'm sorry, Mom, he choked. I should listen to you. Margaret said nothing. She only nodded, tears in her eyes. Then Andrew turned back to Sarah. The church was silent. Even the flowers seemed to stop blooming. You should leave, he said, his voice steady now, before they take you away in handcuffs. And as if the universe had been waiting on cue, the doors burst open. 2 federal agents entered, flashing badges. Sarah Collins. You're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. The fairy tale was over, and the real story, the one built on truth, finally began. Click, click, flash. Dozens of guests pulled out their phones, not to capture a kiss, but a takedown. 2 FBI agents marched down the aisle with cold precision. Their voices sliced through the silence like scalpels. Sarah Collins, you are under arrest for federal crimes including identity theft, wire fraud, and grand larceny. Jessica Sarah let out a strangled gasp. The same mouth that whispered, love, now stammered excuses. This must be a mistake, I don't know what. But the agents didn't flinch. They turned her around, clipped cold steel around her wrists in front of 300 guests and 1,000 flashing cameras. As the veil slipped off her face, it wasn't just fabric that fell. It was every lie she ever told. The hashtag #ConArtistBride was born within seconds. Guests who once admired her gown were now live streaming her disgrace. One caption read, from wedding bells to jail cells. Another, guess she didn't say I do to prison time. Margaret stood still, eyes locked on her son. Not on the handcuffs, not on the gasps, not even on the woman crying in white. Only on Andrew, who for the first time saw clearly. The truth wasn't pretty, but it was finally free. The room was still. The bride was gone. The music had stopped, but the champagne still cold, and the guests still there, wide-eyed, holding empty glasses and full questions. Andrew cleared his throat and stepped up to the altar, not to exchange vows, but to reclaim truth. There won't be a wedding today, he said, voice trembling but strong. But you're still welcome to stay, not to celebrate a marriage, but to celebrate something just as important, freedom. A few awkward chuckles, then applause, then toasts, and in the middle of it all, Margaret, no longer in the shadows, no longer misunderstood, just a mother, seen. Andrew found her near the buffet table, standing still like she wasn't sure she was allowed to breathe yet. He didn't say a word, just took her hand, and for the first time in years she felt it, he chose her. The ballroom filled with music again, but this time the beat wasn't forced, it was messy, real, human. People danced, they clinked glasses, and the empty aisle once meant for a wedding became a dance floor for healing. No dress, no cake, but maybe, just maybe, the most honest wedding they never had. Margaret sat alone on the back porch the next morning, wrapped in a wool shawl that still smelled faintly of lavender, in old tears. The air was crisp, but her heart was heavier than any winter wind. The echoes of last night still played in her ears. Laughter, glasses clinking, her son's voice cracking as he thanked her. But what lingered most was something he hadn't said. Was it worth it, she whispered to no one, eyes fixed on the gray sky. She had saved Andrew, yes. Pulled him from the jaws of a nightmare. But at what cost? His first love shattered, his innocence bruised, his heart stitched together, but not whole. A part of her wanted to go back in time and warn him gently, whispered doubts instead of dropping bombs. Let him find the truth himself. But another part, the part that had spent 9 months carrying him and 30 years protecting him, knew better. Sometimes love means you break the dam before the flood destroys everything. Sometimes love means becoming the villain in your child's story so they don't become a victim in someone else's. And sometimes love means you'll accept being hated just to keep them breathing. Andrew found her sitting there. He didn't say anything at first, just stood in the doorway barefoot holding 2 mugs of coffee. You saved me, he finally said. And I was too blind to see it. Margaret didn't cry. Not this time. She just nodded, looked him in the eye, and said what only a Thompson woman could say with pride: never underestimate a mother who's been underestimated her whole life. Strength isn't always thunder. It isn't fists slamming tables or voices rising above the crowd. Sometimes real strength whispers. It waits, it plans, it sacrifices. Margaret hadn't humiliated Sarah Collins because she wanted revenge. She hadn't destroyed a wedding because she craved attention. She had stood there steady as stone because of one simple, unshakable truth. A mother will bleed before she lets her child be broken. It wasn't glory. It wasn't pride. It was love forged in silence, tested by betrayal and proven in fire. While the world called her ruthless, while some might even whisper controlling, Margaret knew better. She hadn't acted to win. She had acted to protect. And sometimes the strongest people in the room are the ones who can take the hatred, bear the weight of being misunderstood, and still stand tall. Andrew, watching her that night as the music played and laughter filled the air, finally understood. Real strength isn't loud. Real strength looks like his mother. The night had stretched long, but the weight of it finally began to lift. Guests still lingered, glasses half full, talking not of disaster anymore, but of survival. At a quiet corner of the ballroom, Andrew and Margaret sat together. Mother and son, side by side. For the first time in months, there was no wall between them, only truth, raw and sharp but shared. Andrew lifted his glass. His hands still trembled, but his voice did not. Never underestimate a Thompson woman. The words cut through the air, not as a joke, not even as a toast, but as a vow. Margaret laughed, the sound wet with unshed tears. She clinked her glass against his. They laughed, they cried, they bled together in ways no one else in that room could ever understand. But most of all, they survived. And survival in that moment was its own kind of victory. This story reminds us of a simple truth: love isn't always gentle, sometimes it's fierce. Margaret taught us that real protection means making hard choices even when they hurt. In life, we often shy away from conflict, afraid of being misunderstood. But sometimes stepping into the fire is the only way to save the people we love from being burned alive. Trust your instincts. Cherish the ones who dare to tell you the truth even when you don't want to hear it, because their courage might be the shield that saves you one day. If this story touched your heart, don't let it be the last. Hit subscribe to join us for more powerful, life-changing stories. Because sometimes the right story at the right moment can change the way you see everything.